That's okay. I've got one of my guys back here, Riley, who you met at the con. Screen casting. So at some point he'll wander in and find me. So it'll be fine.
Okay, perfect. So at least somebody's there to save you in case you pass out from heat stroke.
Right.
All right.
Cool. Of course, if you got him casting, he's probably dying of heat stroke when you turn off the heat anyways. But...
It's a separate air conditioner, thankfully, so he's good. He'll be fine.
Just put it all on one. You actually accidentally switched off his.
He'd be in here in 5 minutes.
You're like, Mike, what the hell are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Boss, it's getting hot.
All right.
Get back in there. I didn't tell you.
I suppose we should probably do a proper introduction here, huh, Nick?
No. When have we ever done proper introductions?
Yeah, you're right. Screw it. All right, folks, we're back with another episode of Skirmish Supremacy, and tonight we are actually talking with Mike Tunez over at Firelock Games about the game that Nick and I both agreed on was like the new hotness at Adepticon, Blood and Plunder. Mike, how you doing tonight, man?
Pretty good. How about you guys?
Good. Nick's over there doing some painting, and I'm just I'm sitting here looking like an asshole on this camera at the moment. But that's what we got going on.
I can see that. Yeah, I'm going to switch over to him here so I can look at the painting. That's much more interesting. No offense.
Yeah, I was going to say.
See, people like the painting.
I'm just sitting here in like this neon green shirt, looking like a hobo, drinking a Coke Zero. There's nothing interesting going on over here. But so, yeah, I mean, Nick and I did a podcast a while back. Obviously, it was the one that we recorded with you at Adepticon, and it was kind of a short and sweet. So I guess with this one, I know that you have a big Kickstarter coming up, and we'll get into that. But for folks that may have missed that one or decided not to listen to it in the first place, why don't you tell us all a little bit about Blood and Plunder and how you guys got started on it?
All right. So Blood and Plunder is a 28mm historical miniatures game set in the golden age of piracy, and it's been a setting that I've always loved. It started out with Sid Meier's Pirates, playing that game as a kid, and back then it was just called Pirates, but the new version was called same game. Anyway, so just being enthralled with the history of that and that open worldness and all that, just the coolness of sailing around as a pirate and sacking towns and taking ships and all that. So totally sucked me in. So later on when I got into miniatures gaming, I was looking for, it never really occurred to me you could have a realistic kind of pirate game until I started getting into some other historical games and stuff and discovered Legends of the High Seas, which was just that. It was basically a kind of a Hollywood-centered one, but still somewhat historical. It was on the Warhammer historical game range. So that kind of led me into playing with pirate miniatures, and when GW Historical went defunct, I just decided at one point just to kind of have a go at it, and started making up my own rules, and tried it with a friend who's now my business partner, and here we are with Firelock Games and Blood and Plunder.
All right, so you just decided to mess around with some miniatures, and now you have a successful game that how much did your first Kickstarter do? It was something ridiculous.
I know that after the pledge manager and everything, it was a little over 300,000.
Nice. Yeah, I knew it was up there quite a bit. So obviously you guys have had a lot of success. Adepticon, from what I saw, was a massive success for you guys.
Yeah, definitely pretty good there.
And you guys got quite a bit of footage there. Obviously, you guys did your big, I forget what night it was. I think it was Friday night. You guys had the big battle set up where it was like 500 points or something ridiculous between both sides, plus the boats.
Unfortunately, it was the night you guys were doing your dinner. So whatever night that was the night we did it. So
yeah. Of course. We just need to schedule that stuff better next time. Like Nick and I we've been trying to plan it for the longest time, and we were like, oh, God damn it. We don't know anything in Chicago. Somebody help us.
Yeah, it sucks we had to miss it, but it's the event went well though. So
yeah, it did. We after dinner we stopped by and we were in there for quite a bit hanging out, and we took some photos, posted them up online. A lot of people were asking about it, so we drew a lot of interest. And I think the thing that really draws people into your game in particular is the fact that it is a historical game compared to you go to so many conventions now, unless it's like HMGS. Or some of the other conventions where it's like very much it's bolt action or it's Flames of War or some take on ancients, there is no historical piracy as far as I've seen. So I think you kind of caught people off guard with having a historical game.
Yeah,
in a good way.
Yeah, I think I definitely think so. We saw the potential for it in games like Bolt Action and Flames of War, that historical games could kind of come into more of a mainstream of gaming. And with historical pirates, though, we were kind of like, well, this is either going to hit a really small niche crowd, or we can kind of, maybe if we get lucky, we can kind of go in that direction and kind of catch a little bit more of the people who are kind of interested in historicals, but really much more gamers than looking for a good game rather than recreating something historical. Not that you can't do both, Blood Plunder, of course, but I think you know what I'm talking about with the different kind of crowds that kind of brings about.
There's the people that like historicals for the fact that they're playing a piece of history and they want a good game. Mm-hmm. Then there's what a lot of people, we've kind of joked about them in the industry, mm-hmm. is called button counters, where it's like they want their miniatures to be 100% accurate to what it be, and then they want modified stats for rain, range, curvature of the earth, whether or not the gun blows up in the end, and like all this other stuff to where it takes like a minute and a half to fire one rifle. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people just wanted to veer away from a lot of what they see in historicals, which is very simulationist. They still wanted a historical game, but they wanted something that's quick and easy to play. Right.
And for for us, we tried to, the main things to me for the historical game, the important thing is to be able to play historical tactics, right? So historically, if I did it this way, this should be the result. So I think as long as you're capturing that, and you're capturing kind of the essence of the important things, like we have reloading and no sailing against the wind and details like that are kind of big deal, right? They're not the nitty gritty, rivet counter sort of, windage on the rifle kind of stuff, but it does capture the essence of the period. So you really are gaming the period. It's simulating the period in that. It's the results would probably be similar, probably less bloody realistically than what you get in the game, but nobody wants a game with no casualties. So, right. But aside from that, I think it still does kind of what those historical games aim to do. It just kind of abstracts certain aspects to make it more fun and playable.
Yeah, because if we were to talk about playing a 100% true historical pirate game, it would be Nick playing pirates, I'm playing unsuspecting civilians. Nick rolls up and says, "Give me all your stuff," and I say, "Okay." And he goes, "Oh, thank God I didn't have to kill anybody." He gets back on the ship with all my stuff and takes off. That doesn't make for a fun game.
Right. So see, that right there is actually the reason we chose a little bit of the earlier time frame than what most people are used to.
But I won. I'm happy with that game result.
So we're doing the 17th century as opposed to the 18th, which is the one most people know about. Still the golden age, depending on who you ask. Of course, some people would say no, but most people would say yes. So, but in this period, when you have the Buccaneers, who were the original Pirates of the Caribbean, essentially, when you have those guys, they really did actually engage in real battles. So they would actually, Henry Morgan, the most famous thing of Henry Morgan marching his pirate army of like 2,000 troops against Spain and Spain's colony of Panama and sacking it, And then, of course, you've got other guys who are having legitimate sea battles with the Spanish Navy, like Morgan and oh my God, I can't forget the other guy's name. Some other famous Dutch guy who's sailing for the French. So those guys had legitimate naval battles. And even Captain Kidd, a lot of people don't know, he's part of a small group that participated in a naval battle in the Caribbean in the 17th century. So these guys actually had real battles. They didn't just, unlike a lot of the pirates in the 18th century, who literally just were, muggers at sea. These guys actually had real battles. Yeah. So.
Yeah, which is really cool. Now, the other thing I do like is one of the things we talked about at Adepticon that still funny every time I think of it, and I had to get the Henry Morgan miniature because of it. Mm-hmm. You actually have different rules in the game based upon what they were like historically that you put into their stat lines. And it doesn't matter if it's an advantage or not. And Henry Morgan actually had one that I really liked. So, because he was notorious for wrecking ships.
Right. Yeah. So he would have, you can't use any of his fortune points, which are points allow you to re-roll things and stuff like that, and running your ship aground or any unfortunate thing like that. So and then his a guy who's probably his uncle, actually, a guy named Edward Morgan, who was kind of like the leader of the Jamaican militia. So that guy, who was an older guy, fought in the English Civil War, goes to Jamaica, fights, starts fighting the Dutch during the Anglo-Dutch War, and gets on like one of his first main battles. He rolls up there and he's like exerting himself, running around in the hot Caribbean sun, in his full regalia of big coat and hat, and commanding his troops all over the place. And literally just drops dead, probably from heat stroke or a heart attack, in the middle of the thing. So for him in the game, I don't know if you've seen his stats yet, but what he lets you do is when you use one of his command points, he can fatigue himself. He can fatigue his unit to give the unit he gives a command point to 2 actions. Now, the downside to this though is if his unit ever becomes shaken, he has a possibility of just dropping dead. So you remove that model from the game.
That's awesome.
We've got a lot. We try to get as much of those little historical flavor bits as we can in there,
which is amazing. And then you also had some things in. I believe his name was Francois Delaunay, the one that actually used to capture people and ask him for information.
Mm-hmm.
And he would ask one guy, and if he wouldn't tell him, he would cut out the other guy's heart and start eating it in front of the guy he just asked the question to.
Right. Yeah.
Like a psychopath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was definitely a psychopath, kind of a lunatic. He would do stuff like that. He would torture people and literally just cut people into pieces with his sword if he wasn't, eating their heart or doing something strange like that. So, and he's got ruthless. He's also got fear. So people have to, when you meet him in the initial turn, everybody's got to check to see if they keep their cool or they maybe start with some fatigue. So we've got all those. Well, that's some of his little bits of, and what we're trying to do with all these things is we really want to tell the story of what's happening, right? I think a lot of people have this idea who've never really looked at a lot of history that it's just kind of boring, right? But there's some really crazy stories in there, and we really want to tell the story of the period. We want to create that world, kind of like transport people back into that mind frame and that space of time. And see that just like you would with a fantasy or sci-fi setting, and that's something we really want to capture with stuff like that. Yeah,
and I think that you did it quite well in the fact that you kept the flavor of them without making the game overly complicated. That's one thing that I've seen in a lot of the historical miniatures games that I've played in the past or watched people play, to where you do things like that and they overcomplicate it.
Mm-hmm.
To the point to where it's like, okay, so Henry Morgan and crashing his ship, he might have like this extra 5 set or like 2 paragraphs worth of rules of like what happens,
right?
Where you're just like, no, he can't spend fortune points. If he wrecks, he wrecks. Too bad, so sad. That's what you get, Henry Morgan. So
he can't save himself.
Yeah. So the other thing that I was really impressed with, and unfortunately, I did not get a chance to try the ship combat, but I did play the land-based combat, which ran really smooth. It uses all D10s. The system's very easy. You're shooting for a lower score compared to a higher score. So if you have a fight of 3, you're trying to get it down to 2 or lower, because anything you roll equal or over is a success. But the one thing that really impressed me about it is the fact that you guys can do full amphibious battles. So you could start on ships and end up on land, or vice versa.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And that was there was definitely a lot of work to make that work, right? Because we kind of developed it all at the same time. So, which makes it a little tricky because you got to make sure that one rule, so this rule works perfect, right? And then you're like, oh, wait, but then what happens if they're on a ship? So there was a lot of that during development, which slowed it down, unfortunately, which was, that's what we spent most of our time on right up until like the last few months of last year, and then so we really had to work hard to make sure that fighting works the same on a ship, on land, and anything in between, shooting, moving. So we were able to really get it down packed, but it was definitely a challenge to get that all working together. And we're pretty happy with how it came out. I don't know if you caught the tail end of that, the big game we had at Adepticon, but there was a lot of interaction there between the ship and the shore. You got guys stealing longboats and trying to capture the ship from shore, and the ship's like shooting them with cannons, and they're boarding, and there was all kinds of stuff was happening while there was still the land battle raging on the other side of the table.
Yes, and speaking of which, because it is a historical game, cannons will obliterate an entire unit in one hit. So cannons are as scary as they should be.
Yeah, so. especially at point blank range. So, which is where they generally be loading in some grape or some smaller shot in with their cannonballs. So,
yeah, it's that's one thing I read in the rules, and I was actually looking at carting around a cannon with my Marineros just to prove a point. But so, and that's the other cool thing too is you can take the cannons off the ship and actually put them in with a part of a unit that can use artillery. So even on a land-based game, there's nothing stopping you from hauling a cannon onto shore and using it.
Well, you wouldn't be able to. You'd have to start it there. You can't really move the cannons around unless you're on a carriage. But yes, you could definitely have them as long as it's got something to sit in. You can just put the cannon down and have a group of sailors or anybody else really man it and fire it, and it's they fire slowly, but when they hit, they generally hit pretty hard, especially gets groups in the open.
Yes. So right now, currently in the book, you have 4 factions.
Right. So what we have is. That's always a tricky thing with us. We have 4 nationalities, really 3, and 1 is kind of like a mix. And then within those nationalities, you have several factions. So we have 2 for the English, 2 for the Spanish, 2 for the French, and 2 for the Unaligned right now. Not all of those are in the book right now. Some of those we released after the fact, since the French and the Unaligned were kind of thrown in there toward the end of our Kickstarter, since we did much better than we expected. So we didn't get to do all those factions for them, but we've added those recently.
Okay, cool. So I guess let's talk about a couple of those factions. Like you said, you have the nationality, so you've got the Spanish, the French, the English, and the Unaligned. So by playing the different factions, it actually takes kind of, I guess you want to call it the same models that you've had, and makes them play vastly different. So how did you guys go about coming up with some of that? I know obviously history played a part, but as far as game rules.
Right. So the historical part of that was that a lot of the source material that I would read about to kind of get ideas for units and things like that, is I'd realized that there was a lot of, so you'd have guys who were really similar, and there was a lot of mixing. So there was one guy by the name of William Dampier who was at one point a Buccaneer. At one point he was like a plantation owner or something. Then he was a Buccaneer. Then he was a naval captain. And while being a naval captain, he had he was an English naval captain, but he was the only Englishman on the ship, from what I understand. So there's a lot of mixed nationalities and things like that. So because of that, you can get sailors maybe from one faction, use them in another. So we wanted to reflect that part of the period. Rules-wise, we just kind of wanted to add flavor. So these guys fighting in this group might act a little differently. So for the Spanish, for example, the guardacostas, if you have so those guys would maybe not necessarily be used, trained and drilled the same way the regular militia would be. So they're taking more individual shots as opposed to big formation shots. And on top of that, because they're plundering people all over the place, they're generally going after English, French, and Dutch ships. They've got some access to probably a little bit better weapons, better quality gunpowder, so they lose the poorly equipped rule the Spanish would normally have for those weapons. So stuff like that.
Okay, so to where they might be considered inexperienced, they lose the poorly equipped because of it, because they're sacking it from everybody else.
Exactly, right.
Okay, cool. So, and then of course there's a faction I decided to play, which are the Unaligned, because I wanted to play Brethren of the Coast really bad. And then I realized I basically need every single model that's in the range in order to really become the full collector and do everything I want to do.
You're only going to play the log cutters, and you're never actually going to roll. You're just always going to be drunk.
So Nick actually brought up a good point on that one. The log cutters were actually something that I only heard that term a few times looking back at like history books, but you put them in the game, and that was my first time seeing them, and you guys kind of enlightened me as to how they acted in history. So Nick kind of spoiled it a little bit, but you actually put the rule for them in there, which where you roll a dice, and if you roll bad enough or good enough, depending how you want to look at it, they're all hammered.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the log cutters a little bit. Like,
sure.
What was kind of their place in that whole historical period?
So the logwood cutters were primarily English, but there's also some French and even some Spaniards and Dutch and other groups of people with them. So logwood was a tree that was really valuable to use as a dye. So they'd take cores or sap or something. I'm not really sure on that part. Out of the trunks of these trees, and they'd use it to make some a really good expensive dye. So it was really valuable. Now the problem is all of it grew in Spanish territory, right? So the guys who went to cut logwood were considered by the Spaniards to be poachers. So they'd set up these camps, cutting their logwood to basically go make a profit. And most of these guys who were doing that were generally buccaneers or other sorts of adventurers who were basically either in between raids or sort of retired because they're the buccaneers who are only doing it legally. So only if there's a war or something where they can get a commission to go fight. Otherwise, they'll just go steal trees from Spain, apparently. So, so
makes sense to me. Got to make money somehow.
Yeah. So the Spanish went after these guys all the time. Now these guys, because they're mainly a bunch of old buccaneers who were pretty experienced, they often put up a fight. And not only that, but occasionally they'd be tempted by a nice Spanish prize while they were out sailing, and they would just go ahead and capture it. So that's the reason we put them in the game, is because they were so often the target of Spanish attacks and attacking the Spanish themselves. So they're kind of like pirates on vacation who occasionally will do some more extra pirating. Look at them that way. Right? So
I'm on vacation, but you know what? That ship is just it's too good. Let me go grab it.
So.
We're
one of the things
forgetting the most important addition to the game. I've got to point out the most important addition to the game. It came out April 1st.
Oh, yeah. Let me see this. The Blunder Monkey.
It is the Blunder Monkey. All right. Sorry. I just saw the Blunder Monkey and had to bring him out.
So explain to me, though, and for the listeners out there,
mm-hmm.
The reason on the logwood cutters, before the game, you roll to see what's going on with them.
Right.
And
so
one of the things that happens is they could actually be drunk.
Right. So that's basically that happens when they're defending, essentially. So when they're defending, it's the state that they have been caught in, essentially. Right. So the assumption is it's Spanish. They're being attacked by the Spanish, although obviously it won't necessarily be Spanish, but they're being attacked by somebody, and they're not. It's their state of readiness. So in some instances, if you roll really well in that chart, you'll get an extra action the first turn. They're like, bring it on, we're ready to go. In other instances, maybe their weapons aren't ready, so everybody starts unloaded. So it's a kind of a mixed bag. The drunk one is it can be good or it could be bad. Just depends how you look at it. It makes you really great on your resolve test, but not so good on your shooting, because it's kind of hard to shoot a black powder musket while being drunk. So. So that's kind of what that represents. And that's kind of also a precursor to what we're going to go with when we move to the 18th century eventually. And we do those pirates. A lot of those guys that ended up getting captured, they're, anchored somewhere just drinking all night on their ship. And the next thing you know, a Navy ship just sails around the bend. And now we're drunk and the Navy's here. So we got to do what we got to do. So it's a similar kind of thing.
Nice. So we've talked quite a bit about the core rulebook, or what's presently out now, but obviously the big exciting piece for a lot of us out there is you have a Kickstarter that's actually launching this next month.
Right. Yep. June 21st is the tentative date. I think. I'm not the one to ask on that one, but I'm just putting the stuff together for it. But yeah, so that is going to be our that Kickstarter is to round out the 17th century. So all the stuff that we started in the first book, we're going to kind of finish it in this. So we're going to add a bunch of new ships, some new nationalities, some new units to go with those nationalities, new units to the existing nationalities, a bunch of new model ranges, some new boxes, some new army boxes, and some expansion boxes, and some new troop types. So first of all, we have the big Galleon, which I'm not sure if you've seen, but we've got it's going to be our first
8-9 times.
So it's
in the background.
It's a big, hefty ship with 28 cannons, and it's 3 masts. It's 4 deck sections, so the whole thing is going to be able to carry on deck about 116 models. So it's going to be, and then we're going to have some optional rules to play larger games, and because there's going to be a book that comes along with this Kickstarter, and there's going to be some rules to play larger games that allow you to use the lower deck section as kind of a different thing. So you could essentially have 200 crew aboard this thing, which is nice. So we want to make it that realistic for those people who want to play those just big master and commander style shootouts, but in the 17th century, we've got the big ship to do that with.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So obviously, most people that are going to be listening to this at this point probably saw that you guys did a lot of stuff with Beasts of War, and one of the new factions that you actually announced, and you've been showing quite a few pictures of, is the Dutch.
Right. So the Dutch are pretty big players in the Caribbean, in the New World here. So they've earlier in the 17th century, which when we came out with the game, it focused really on the later 17th, but now we're going to extend that kind of towards the rear end of the 16th century too, the earlier part of it. And so they were kind of a big deal. A Dutchman by the name of Piet Hein, who's going to be one of our characters, he was the last person to successfully capture a ship of the Spanish treasure fleet, right? So that was that was a huge deal. He paid off the entire army or something like that for I don't know how long, for several months. I think it was 8 months or something like that, which is huge. The entire army, the entire nation, he paid them off, right? So they can, which was good because they were kind of just out. They were trying to fight for their independence from Spain. I believe at this point they're still under the Spanish. They're still fighting. So that was a huge blow to the Spanish, big boon to the Dutch. And they had a lot of pretty legendary guys, like one of which was oh my god, how can I forget? I'm really bad with names today. I'm just dropped all over the place. But they just had a lot of really epic guys. We'll leave it at that. But they're gonna have some new options. They're gonna be the best sailing group out there. So the Dutch at this time period, they were doing pretty good. The English were their only real competition at sea, although the Dutch were the French gave them a pretty good fight as well. And but Dutchmen grew up around the sea. They grew up around ships, so they're going to be good at sailing. They're going to have some extra rules. They're going to have a lot of the units are going to be focused towards close combat and ship fighting and that sorts of thing. So it's going to add a nice different flavor. Also, Dutchmen they were everywhere. So you're going to find Dutchmen on English ships, on French ships, even on Spanish ships. There are parts of the Netherlands that are still part of Spain in this time period, and some of them fought in the New World. So you could actually play the Spanish nationality using a Dutch faction that we're going to incorporate as well. So it's they're going to mix and match well with what we already have.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that because that's one thing I was kind of worried. I don't want to say worrying about, but I noticed that amongst the first 3 nationalities in the first book that there was a lot of cross-matching, and me, after getting excited over seeing the Dutch and everything else, I really started kind of looking into it, and I wasn't at first sure what involvement they had with the other ones, because keep in mind, my stuff was quick Google searches. I didn't really get a chance to dive into it. But I was just like, God, these guys really ruled over everything. So, as far as what they did, they were really, really good at it. Like you said, they were the best sailors. And I was like, how are they going to mix and match with everybody else? So it makes sense now if part of the Netherlands was also part of Spain. Right.
So, and then so you'll have an entire you'll have an entire faction of the Dutch that are basically Spanish. So there'll be a Spanish faction, but it's all Dutch units with a little bit of Spanish in there as well, of course. But so that's going to be a fun one, a nice, interesting one. So.
Nice. And then I noticed that you also have the natives.
Yep. So we've got the Native Caribbeans, the Native Americans in general, but the Caribbeans are the one we're focusing on. And so that comprises the Carib, which is currently known as the Kalinago, the Taino, the Arawaks, and the Darien, and a bunch of other groups that were active. Calusa in Southwest Florida here. And so those guys are going to be really interesting. They're going to be really different. They're going to have I haven't completely figured out some of the extended options we're going to do for them. So some of that is still pending as I do research, because it's really hard to find really good sources. Obviously, you get a lot of European sources on them, but those are clearly a little biased at the time, as they saw them as enemies and threats. So, but I have picked up a lot of their tactical stuff and how they play. So they're going to be, these guys are going to be sneaky. they're gonna ambush a lot. They're just gonna be real hard to nail down, and they're gonna be pretty bad. Because when it came to smaller scale combats, like small skirmishes like this game represents, that's when the Europeans really got their butt kicked a lot of times. In the grander scheme of things, a lot of the native groups weren't organized enough or didn't really have the numbers to really put up a united front. But in these smaller battles, these guys were tough dudes. So they're gonna be a really interesting different group, and especially the Caribs who were really good sailors, and fought on giant canoes, which is one of the things that we'll be coming out with in the Kickstarter.
Oh, awesome.
And could even swim. They were known to kill sharks underwater with knives. So these guys these guys are not afraid of going. So these will be, for those people who know Blood and Plunder, water is death. But these guys will not die in the water.
So they're like, whatever, I'm going to swim to your ship, and you should be afraid.
That could happen, yeah.
And I'm going to kill a shark along the way. That would be amazing. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see a lot of the stuff. Now, obviously, you guys have posted, at least as far as what you have done, some of the 3D renders for the Dutch and the natives.
Right.
And so what else do you kind of have planned to go along with that? As far as what you can say.
So as far as new nationalities, that's pretty much it for right now. Those are the two big ones. There could be some other ones depending on what we could get done, but it will probably end up being a stretch goal if it is. But I can't go into that, unfortunately. But it'll be revealed at some point. Now, as far as ships, we've got our Galleon for sure, and we've got a Piragua. There's some other ships that we're working on, but so it's kind of a race to see right now which one's going to be in the Kickstarter. But let's just say there's a lot of Dutch influence in some of the ships that are coming up.
Sure.
And like a lot of the galleons were actually built by the Dutch that the Spanish used. So, so aside from that, the book itself is going to be one of the core things that's going to add a lot of stuff. So the book is going to kind of be a comprehensive army book. So it's going to have all the existing factions that were in the main rule book, but they'll be expanded upon. They'll have new units. They'll have new options. They'll have different ways to take units. And then there'll be all the new units and factions. So we're going to add nationalities to each one. We're going to expand the ranges of combat. So instead of focusing on just the Caribbean, we're going to move up to North America as well, and cover stuff that's going on in like New York area, Virginia area, South Carolina, Florida, and even Canada. So along with that will come some new event tables. So if you're playing a game in North America in the winter time, right? So doing King William's War or something like that, which is the first French and Indian War, instead of being really hot, it's going to be really cold. It can start to snow. You get that kind of thing. So nice. And so you can be sailing around, and you can have some new cool terrain for like glaciers and stuff like that. So, and then there's going to be the rules for the larger battles, so you can kind of play big old massive battles if you so desire. And drawing a blank here, but I know there was something else I wanted to say. But so lots of new units for sure, bigger battles, new events. Definitely lots and lots of new characters. So there's going to be we're literally trying to get as many characters as we can get. So we're right now. One of the main things I'm doing is just reading like crazy, trying to find new people that we can add to all the different groups throughout the different nationalities and factions. So that's one of the things I'm doing. I'm just going to get as many as I possibly can play test in there, and then we'll probably release more in the future through PDFs and stuff like that. But one of the big things, I remember what I want to say now, was that we're going to introduce cavalry as well. So for land battles, you've got guys now who will be on horseback with carbines and pistols, and that's going to add a nice different element to the ground game. Between the Native Americans and the cavalry, you're going to have a lot of different interesting dynamics happening in some land battles.
Nice. So yeah, I did notice those. And the one thing that I believe it was posted on the Blood and Plunder Facebook page is that the mounted characters they're kind of a faction neutral. They don't really
right.
There's no like Spanish version or French version or English version or Dutch version. It's all mounted troops. Right.
So that's one thing that you'll probably see. You're going to see a few different iterations of that kind of approach. so that way we can, since there's some units that would generally be pretty similar between different factions, like cavalry, for example. A guy on a horse in a 17th century uniform with pistols and a musket. The main difference would be the hilt of his sword. So we didn't really think it was worth making a whole nother set of models for each faction for a different sword hilt. And and then that's lots of little bits that can break in molds pretty easy. So we're like, we'll just kind of make a generic sword hilt that'll kind of work a little bit for all of them, and that'll be, that'll let us do a lot more units. So instead of just, because we could have, that would have been a lot of resources on just the cavalry. So now instead we can add a bunch of other stuff. You're going to see some generic units that are added that are going to be called volunteers, that'll add to sailors. And another big thing, actually, that I just should have remembered to mention earlier, is the addition of characters to the game that are not commanders. So these are guys.
Oh, really?
These are guys that'll follow the same rules as commanders, but they're not the commander of the force. So they may or may not have command points. But they'll add. So it could be as simple as a guy who follows all the rules for a commander, but has 0 command points with a 0-inch command range, but let's say adds ruthless or something to your group, right? So he just adds a special rule, or he may have a different weapon or something along those lines.
And he's still, so as far as that goes mechanically, he'll still be, he still is part of whatever unit you attach him to, just like a commander.
Exactly.
He's not out there running around solo.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Because I guess that was my next question. Is like, I'm trying to think if there's anybody historically that could just like stand out in the middle of combat saying, "Look at me," and take it like that. And I'm like, no, they don't die immediately.
Yeah, we initially, when we were designing the game, the commanders were solo figures that would run around on their own, but it was just way too easy to kill them, so we had to make a bunch of rules to protect them. But at that point, we're like, well, we can just cut out this entire section of rules and just make them join the unit, and that simplifies everything. So
that's a good way to do it.
Yeah,
so,
I like that.
Yeah, unfortunately. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, kind of talking about rules and all that. I know, Tim and I, we picked up a bunch of stuff, and on the flight back, and since then we've read over the rule book several different times now.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing, we always walk away going, "Wow, we really like these rules. We like how they're simple, but they add to the game. They give the game its depth, but they're not hard to remember. They're not complicated, but they're elegant. And also, forward looking was one of the other things I noted when I saw all the cavalry stuff, and I'm like, but they don't have cavalry yet. It was like, but
right, yeah, we wanted to make sure those rules were in the main book. We did playtest cavalry, some generic cavalry we invented to make sure that all that stuff worked. But thank you for the kind words. And me and Fred Barnard, who the other guy you interviewed at the event, that was one of the main things. Was we wanted to make sure the game was really, really playable and very streamlined, and there was not a lot of differences from one rule to the next. So one rule would function the same way the other rule did. So we try to make shooting, combat the same, but same rules, but still feel different. So, the adding of the range and the way cover works and stuff. So the same general mechanics are there, and same thing as, if you're fighting on land or you're fighting on the deck of a ship, mechanically it's identical. So there's some different advantages to each one, but there's advantages and disadvantages, I should say. But mechanically it's identical. So, and that was something we strove and worked really hard to try to make happen. So we're very pleased that most people are appreciating that and that it's actually worked out. So
yeah, definitely. So I didn't want to go back and talk about the book in the upcoming Kickstarter. So you're saying that it's going to have all of the original factions from the first book and
right.
The second book, obviously with all the new expanded rules and all that. So is this going to be, I guess, a Blood and Plunder 2.0, or do you still need the first book in order to play? Like, are you going to port all the rules from the first book into this one and just make it a bigger, thicker version?
No. So it's there. There's a very, very small rules section that just adds some new optional things, like the rules for larger games, rules for multiplayer games. We're looking at a campaign system, a simple campaign system that we might throw in there. things like that, right? But it's primarily just an expansion book. So it's going to have a ton of armies in there, a ton of new units. It's going to have all the units, including the old ones, just for convenience sake. All the ships are going to be in there. So it's just going to be a handy like army reference, so that when you have that, you've got all the different troops and all different units that we've got to date, and even stuff that there will be stuff in there that that won't even come out in the Kickstarter. Units that we plan on releasing that we've already been working on are going to be in there as well. So that's also going to be kind of a release guide for the time frame between the Kickstarter and when we do the next big project, which is to move the game into the 18th century and start covering more famous guys like Blackbeard and Black Bart and Jack Rackham and Anne Bonny and Mary Read, all those guys, as well as a lot of the historical stuff that happened around that time frame, like Queen Anne's War, which is the famous, most people know Queen Anne's War from Queen Anne's Revenge, but
Right.
It was a pretty interesting conflict happening. The War of Jenkins' Ear, which was started by a Spanish guardacosta for cutting off a guy's ear and sending it to the guy's king or something like that. Or he said he'd do the same to his king. And that's kind of where that's where the story ends for the 18th century. There, it'll be up to the War of Jenkins' Ear, and then from there we'll move to the next half of the 18th century to cover the American Revolution and things like that.
Nice. So as far as that goes, I guess let's talk a little bit of history behind that. So you guys right now are doing 16th, 17th century, and then 18th century are, I guess if you want to call it, a lot of the pirates that a lot of people know about.
Right.
Like you just mentioned. So technology-wise, for a lot of people listening, they kind of look at it as like, oh, this is all kind of Renaissance. And obviously that's just kind of the generic thought a lot of people have because it kind of falls within that era. But technology-wise, what will be changing between those periods? Like what did Black Bart have compared to Henry Morgan? So
technology-wise, there's a lot of change. One of the big ones that I'll point out that surprises most people is wheels on ships. So in the 17th century, even in the early 18th century, that wasn't invented yet. People were steering ships with tillers or what's called a whipstaff, which is like a big pole that comes out of the deck of the ship connected to the rudder below. So that's one of the big technological advances that's going to allow for ships to turn a little better, be a little more maneuverable, which is something that I'm thinking about as an add-on for a ship. But so
spoilers.
So technology-wise, though, the Buccaneers were surprisingly ahead of their time. So a lot of the stuff that changes technology-wise, like matchlock muskets to flintlock muskets, firelocks, I should say, that's something that happens kind of toward the end of the 17th, early 18th century. But the Buccaneers are using flintlocks already, in the 1620s and 30s, way early. They're also using the cartouche box, which is basically a little, wooden box that they'd wear on their side or in their front that had little paper cartridges with some gunpowder and a musket ball in them, so they can load faster instead of the old way of pouring gunpowder from a bottle or from a bandolier or something like that, and then loading the ball. So those are the big ones. Also, but probably the most significant one is bayonets. So standing armies start to get equipped with bayonets, which gets rid of pikes from land warfare. Not a significant change for us because there's not many pike armed units running around in the New World for the most part, right?
Right. I think a lot of them were the Spanish Guard.
Yeah. So right. So even the lanceros that we have in the game, those guys would by the 18th century. My understanding is that they're kind of, the Spanish are finally investing in their New World colonies. So those guys are probably going to be given muskets at that point. Maybe not with bayonets, maybe with bayonets, but the bayonets will be cool because they kind of give you the advantage of the lance and of a musket at the same time without any detriment. So that's going to be a big thing. Is all the main army units are probably going to be armed with bayonets.
Right.
Well, that's good because I hate the lanceros.
Well,
you only hate them because how bad you got destroyed by them.
Unfortunately, a lance is still longer than a musket, so the lance will negate the bayonet rule. So,
all right. So in a way, the lanceros is if anybody who's still has like the good old reliable lance can still win in a charge combat versus somebody who's just got a bayonet.
Yeah, and the lance or the half pike or weapons like that, stayed in use aboard ships all the way into the Napoleonic Wars because, in those close quarters combats, they were still useful. So it's a weapon that won't go away.
Right.
Well,
that makes perfect sense. And, I have to say, it because it was used against me during the demo game. And, it was like, here's this unit. If you charge it, they'll stab you. If you let them charge you, they'll stab you again.
Right, yeah. That's generally how they work. You just got to stand back and shoot at them until they go away.
Yeah, that's basically what Nick ended up having to do because I remember I charged it on the corner, and he shot at me, killed one guy, and then my unit pretty much just took out all of his sea dogs. They were just gone. So,
yeah. Not a unit that actually known for its shooting. They had pistols, so they weren't really going to be able to hurt the charging Lanceros very well, anyways. But yeah,
nice. Yeah. So, Mike, I got to ask you: is there any other little secrets or any little nuggets you want to throw out there to the listeners about something to really look forward to on the Kickstarter? You can be vague. I don't need you to like just spill the beans. You can be vague, but is there something you want to throw out there?
So, people have been asking a lot for a female pirate captain. They quote a lot of, unfortunately, fictional, out of setting or out of period female pirates. But we've been really trying hard to find one, but we have not been able to really find a real historical one who actually we can show was a real person. First of all, that's important, and second of all, actually fought. So we were still unsuccessful for the 17th century. We have somebody for the 18th century. We have two for the 18th century, but because people just really have been bringing that up a lot, we did find a good middle ground to kind of cover something that could have happened, and I'll leave it at that.
All right.
So I think that's something people will be excited about when we do release it. I don't think I've been cleared to talk about that yet, so I can just hint at it for now is all I can do.
All right, I think I got it. So, and I won't elaborate on what I think it is.
You can go ahead and elaborate all you want, as long as I didn't say it.
So, and again, this is me again just kind of Googling. So, folks, if I get this wrong, if there's any pirate aficionados out there, and you tell me I'm way wrong, I'm going to listen to you first. But one of the big ones I think from that time period was actually I forget what they were called, but they were the Buccaneer Wives, where basically these are the wives of these guys that went out and raided and murdered and pillaged and plundered, and they were like, yeah, we're going to get on some of that action too, only by a little bit. So that's what I think they are.
So you're not wrong about those guys. About those girls. They did exist. They didn't actually go out and raid and plunder, but it's not outside the realm of possibility that they did defend themselves when attacked by the English or Spanish in their hometowns, because they were capable of they were really good shots, just like their husbands were, and that's where they learned their trade was from their husbands. But that's not what I'm referring to. But that is something that you may see in the future, though. I will say that. Okay.
So I thought I had it. I was wrong. All right, Nick, your turn. You guess.
Oh, I don't know. I did see on the Facebook group, and it would be kind of hilarious if this was true, but that there was a floating brothel that they really didn't, all they did was let the guys come on, steal all their stuff, and kick them back off. That would be hilarious. Almost as awesome as a blender monkey.
I haven't come across that one yet. I must have missed that one, but I may have to look into that one. Doesn't sound likely, but it is interesting.
Nice. So, and then I know a couple people asked on the Blood and Plunder site, but I wanted to get some clarity on this. So, as far as your April Fool's monkey with a blunderbuss, that a lot of people bought models from Patrick Heath because of what Nick just showed them. Is the monkey with a blunderbuss going to be a model that is legal in tournaments?
No. Unfortunately not.
I didn't hear that. Every game I play, there is going to be a monkey with a blunderbuss.
Even if it's just a side model and doesn't have the rules.
And that's fine. We just put it out there for fun.
I've got rules. There was a card. It says monkey with blunderbuss.
There was a card. It's hard to find these days, but it's out there.
We'll share that on the Skirmish Supremacy page. Sorry, Mike, we're going to go ahead and break that whole game for you. But so, again, we're thinking end of June for the Kickstarter.
Right.
Okay, awesome. So we covered quite a bit of ground on this whole thing. Is there anything else that you want to put out there?
Well, we did cover quite a lot. So we will be releasing weekly little previews on our Facebook. So keep checking that on our website as well. Our website, by the way, is firelockgames.com, in case anybody was curious. And we've got some stuff that we'll be showing between that time. And there's a lot to look forward to. We also have stuff releasing in between. So we have some new releases that are not for Kickstarter, so that while people are waiting for their Kickstarter stuff to arrive, we can still have some new releases coming out slowly. One of the things I'm most excited about is we're going to release a deck of cards that has all the little unit cards that you saw, right, for the individual units.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to have all the different options. So any option that the faction gives you. So like we talked about the Guadacosta before, where they lose where they trade drilled for sailors rule, and they lose the poorly equipped, you'll have a card that represents that version of the unit. So you'll have the unit with all of its changes already on it for easy reference. And
nice. So instead of it just being like, here's the basic, I think those are the Milicianos. It's not just a Miliciano. It is the Guardacosta Miliciano with all the rules already.
And if they're inexperienced, trained, or veteran, the point cost will be on there, so you can pick them up easy. And it's going to be a pretty hefty set of cards. I think it was 131 cards.
Good Lord!
So, so that's currently being printed. We're hoping to have it here soon. I think it's getting shipped out next couple weeks or so. So as soon as we have it, we're going to be able to sell it, and it's going to have all that stuff. It's going to have lots of new stuff as well, which we'll also release in PDF form going forward. I'm hoping that we'll have our first set of those PDFs out next week. But a lot of Kickstarter prep work to do, so I can't promise that one, but soon. But it's going to have some new options to use existing models as different units. So, for example, we have one of the first ones we'll have out is the French chasseurs, who were basically the Buccaneers. It's a faction based around the Buccaneers, or the hunters on Hispaniola, and all the people who worked with them. And it's going to have a new unit, the Milicians, which is a French unit people have been asking about a lot. Do you see it on the card? But nobody's seen the stats yet, so that's going to finally come out. We've also got the Corsarios, who are Spanish. They're basically another version of the Guadacosta. So they're Spanish privateers, but instead of being from the New World, they're primarily from Europe. So these guys are a little more seasoned, a little more experienced. They're kind of the elite Spanish for right now. So you're gonna get a Spaniard who's kind of the equal of a Buccaneer, point wise and stat wise, although they will be somewhat different, and it's just using the regular Miliciano model. So it's some new options and different ways to play the units that you already have. So that's coming out pretty soon.
Cool. And that's always a good thing too, because a lot of people always ask, well, how much mileage can I get out of each individual model that I own? Because that seems to be a new thing nowadays. It's not so much buying new models as much as like how much mileage can I get out of it. So having options like that, I think, is great. Yeah,
and since it's a historical game, a Spaniard with a musket is a Spaniard with a musket. So some units don't really warrant a new sculpt, and we can have some releases like that so that people can kind of get a completely different play out of that model. So not just between factions, but now a different unit representing the same model. So you'll have some stuff like that.
Nice. Yeah, I dig it. I know that one of the ones I was kind of looking at for the logwood cutters was is it the engages, or am I pronouncing that wrong?
Probably. I don't know. I think it's engages, but
okay.
I've checked. I generally check the French pronunciations when I come up with the names, and then I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna remember that, and then I forget it every time. And then I get made fun of for my poor French accent. So.
Well, I mean, you've spent so much time practicing the Spanish one, Hey.
Yeah. It's my English one that I've got lots of practice on. Spanish is actually my first language, so. It's no problem there. Now, and then one more thing that I can't tease that I'm personally very excited about. Is that we're going to be partnering with some other companies to similar like we've done with Tableware to bring some new stuff. So we're going to have some different ship options available that are not resin kits. They're they're basically a laser cut kit, and the guys' models are really nice. So we're going to design some stats for these, and we're going to release those. They'll probably be direct only, and they give you some different options, some new ships, some kind of more obscure ships that weren't as popular or as well known.
Okay.
Or just stuff that'll be odd to do in resin, or things of that nature. So we've got one coming up, and we've also got some fortresses in the works. So some model fortresses to really get the sea to land portion going. You might see we're still on the fence where those are coming out through. So you may see some of that you may see some of that as a stretch goal. You may see some of that. It just depends on whether we need the cost. How much financial coverage we need. I suppose the way to put it on that. So we'll see. So there's a bunch of stuff. We never stop trying to bring you guys exciting new pirate stuff. So a lot to look forward to. So definitely stay tuned for all that.
Awesome.
So on these ships, and this is going off something I saw Alex post or comment on.
Mm-hmm.
Would these happen to be like single deck, larger than a longboat, smaller than a sloop kind of vessels?
Well, that will be in the Kickstarter, and that would be the Piragua, which is the Piragua is basically a very, very large dugout canoe. Some of these were like 40 feet long, carrying 2 sails. You can carry some swivel guns, but you'll see that's something you'll probably see previews for pretty soon, as we're about to get. I'm daily expecting my prototype version to show off.
Awesome.
So as soon as that comes out, we'll start showing that off. That's going to be a fun little vessel.
Nice.
Wait a second. I just noticed something on the board behind you, and it says Scurvy Dice.
Should be covering that up, I think.
Too late now.
So Scurvy Dice, that's something I don't mind talking about. In fact, Scurvy Dice is something I'm very excited about. But it's just we have to find the proper time to get it out. And it's a game that's mainly done. It's designed by a gentleman by the name of Chris Strecker, and it's a dice game. It's a pretty simple dice game that's super fun, plays fast, but is also got a lot of strategy to it. I've never liked dice games in my life. I'm not really much of a board gamer. It's pretty much just a miniatures gamer. But this game was really fun and really got my attention. There's definitely something special about it. So he's actually one of the guys who makes all of our fantastic terrain boards. And he just kind of showed us the game, and he's like, "Hey, it's a pirate game. You guys are kind of pirate guys." So we loved it. We loved it to death. So we actually demoed it at Gen Con, and we've demoed it at a few other places too. And people are trying to steal the demo copies from us. So we think it's going to do really well. We just got to get it out. Hopefully really soon. So something else to look forward to. We're all about diversity here, not just miniatures games. We're looking to do a bunch of other games in the future. We want to give people all their blood and plunder first. Focus on what we can do. So,
right, focus on your baby.
That's right.
Then give him all the scraps afterwards. No,
I wouldn't call Scurvy Dice the scraps, but it's mainly for a different crowd. It's also an good in-between game, little game to play while you're waiting for people to show up. But it's super fun. I'm excited to get it out. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are definitely looking to diversify, which is always good.
Yeah.
Nice. So, Nick, is there anything else you want to throw in there? Because otherwise we can wrap this bad boy up. I don't think we could. We could keep going for forever, but now we're going to start getting to the human tactics.
So, I noticed that you took your ball cap off, and you were talking about getting in theme, and it looks like you've got a perfect hat to be in theme sitting right beside you that you totally could have worn.
There you go. I can wear it now.
There we go.
There we are.
Oh, there it is. See, now it's better.
There you go. So it's far too hot in here right now to wear a hat, though. So.
I was going to say that air conditioning probably sounds much more enjoyable now than when it was when you turned it off.
Oh yeah, I didn't think it would get so hot so fast. I was very wrong. It must be very warm outside today. So, I mean, it looks like it's about 85 degrees. So
yeah, that's
pretty warm evening.
yeah.
It's not quite that bad here, but it's pretty bad here in Atlanta as well. So we know.
Yeah,
it got really crazy because it's been raining here the last few days. It got really cool for a while, and then the sun came out this afternoon, and it all of a sudden went to sweltering.
Yeah, it happens. So what happens in the South.
Yep, pretty much. But thanks for coming on, Mike. Couple things for Skirmish Supremacy folks. We have the 2-player starter set for Counterblast, which probably by the time you hear this, the book starter is out as well. But the Counterblast 2-player starter set, that is still ongoing, and you can get the go and enter and get your entries on the site. It will be closing on the 31st of May, with the winner announced shortly after that.
Wow, that's coming up soon.
It is.
Tell me about it. I'm feeling the crunch.
Yes, you're preparing for your Kickstarter, so
yes, Kickstarters are a fun time. It's a fun time of excitement and torment. So,
yeah, I was gonna say it's 30 days of pleasurable hell.
Yeah,
and that's even before it's launched. Then it launches.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it'll all be worth it. It'll all be worth it to get you guys the cool new stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely going to be something I'm going to be paying very, very, very close attention to. So I think, folks, this is actually going to wrap up this episode. So again, Mike, I want to thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thanks, guys, for having me. It was a good time as always.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely look forward to the next Blood and Plunder Kickstarter, where you will be bleeding quite a bit because your wife is going to murder you after Mike Tunez and the crew all decide to plunder your wallets. That will wrap up this episode of Skirmish Supremacy. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.